Howdy friends, this is Andy Hedges, and I'm happy to announce that my new album, The Westerner, released on March 27th and is available now anywhere you listen to music. The album was produced by my good friend Chris Ryden and the great Americana producer Rich Brotherton. I'm joined by some wonderful musicians, including special guests Dom Flemons and Ramblin' Jack Elliott. You can order CDs and vinyl from andyhedges.com. Thanks for listening. I'd like to start today's show with a poem by the classic poet Bruce Kiskadden. And this is from Kiskadden's 1947 book, Rhymes of the Ranges and Other Poems. And it's entitled, Alkali Ike's Zippers. Now speaking of zippers, says Alkali Ike, them zippers is something I really don't like. I aimed to buy clothes like I always had wore till I started looking around in the store. They had some new shirts and some new overalls that fastened with zippers, no buttons at all. I reckoned that clothes with a rigging like that would be fine for the boys on the Alkali Flat. Because where there's alkali water to drink, things may happen sooner than what you might think. So I got me some clothes that was rigged up like that and went back to my camp on the Alkali Flat. Next morning I'd traveled for maybe a mile when the time come to give them new zippers a trial. I grabbed at the handle and give 'em a jerk, but holy old golden, them zippers don't work. I swear and I sweat, I'm sure out of luck. I've started 'em crooked, the zipper is stuck. I fuss and I pull till I get the thing straight, then the zipper, it works, but a little too late. The next thing I do is to throw them new garments up onto a cactus for ants and for varmints. And I reckon that buttons is safer at that for fellers that lives on the Alkali Flat. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy west and beyond. My guest today is Jan Hunewill. Jan Hunewill is a ranch wife, a reciter of cowboy poetry, and the matriarch of the historic Hunewill Ranch family in Bridgeport, California. The Hunewill Ranch began in the 1860s when Napoleon Bonaparte Hunewill began raising cattle in Bridgeport Valley to supply beef to the miners of Bodie. In 1931, Lenore Hunewill had the idea to transform the working ranch into a guest ranch to keep the operation alive during the Great Depression. The ranch has continued as both a working cattle and guest ranch, with the 7th generation on the ranch today. I sat down with Jan at her home on the ranch last summer and recorded this interview. Here's Jan Hunewill.
It was meant to be. I'm a spiritual person, and there's no question that I was meant to be here eventually. But I was born in San Diego in Mercy Hospital. My father was he was a Navy dentist, and they'd already lived in China and the Philippines, and they'd had my brother who was 10 years older than I was, and then I came along. So I was born in San Diego, and we ended up living in Livermore Valley. My father was was out on the Pacific on World War II, and my mom was in San Diego there, and he was on the battleship Massachusetts. So he was in charge of the dentist in the South Pacific to make sure he had a dental clinic on the ship, and his best friend was a Catholic priest. We weren't Catholic, but they played bridge all the time. I can remember, I was just a little girl hearing these stories, but yeah, so then after that, during World War II was still going on, we went to Livermore. Beth was a big camp. And my dad was the senior dental officer there, and we could we could live in that area, like Walnut Creek and Danville and all that area in there. So that was the way that was for a while. And then I lived we went from, obviously I'm a Navy, I was all over. We went to New York, the Finger Lakes in New York. And then we went to, this is where the meant to be comes in. By the time I'm in high school, I am in New London, Connecticut, and my dad's the senior dental officer at the New London Submarine Base, which is still the submarine base for the Navy. And he got orders to go to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, which in those days was a naval base that had nothing to do with the prison camp that later has evolved there. So after having a conference, and he was a senior officer at those, because I was born later in their life, and he turned down that duty, and because now if we had gone to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, I would have gone to one of those wonderful private schools that they have in New England. There's a lot of wonderful private schools, but we wanted to stay together. So then the next duty that he got assignment was at where the football stadium is in San Francisco. We went down, and then we lived on the peninsula south of San Francisco, and I graduated from Burlingame High School, and it just astounds. Some guests will come on Sunday night and say they're from Burlingame, and I'll say, they can't believe it. But anyway, so I graduated from Burlingame High School, and then I went to Stanford. So on a vacation. Meanwhile, when we lived in the East in Connecticut, my father and I had done a lot of horseback riding, which we did with the Connecticut College for Women, and you can ride along the river. And anyway, we loved that. So we took a vacation up at Lake Tahoe at the Stanford Summer Camp, and we went horseback riding, my dad and I. And so he asked the wrangler, who I have no idea who that was all those years ago. He said, where could we go for vacation where we could ride horses all the time? And whoever that wrangler was knew about Hunewill Ranch, and my dad wrote it all down. And so from then on, so how could that not have been meant to be? So from then on, we came here for vacation. Then I came here to work for college. You know, you work when you go to college, and I came here.
Were you working as a wrangler?
No. Oh no, I was not that red hot of a writer. I thought I was, but they were all very sweet and loving to me. And his dad always took the best care of me. But I have no claims. Like my children, they are hot shots. But anyway. But I've ridden here now all my life and love that every minute of it. But I don't call myself an expert, and I'm really good at hanging on, and carrying the children in front of you and behind you and all of that. And I've just ridden many a mile, and I'll tell you about that. But anyway, so then I worked here. I've done every job there is to do here. But my husband and I, he was their son, the Hunewill son. His name was Stan, and he's been passed away for about 14 years now, sadly. But we fell in love right away. You could do that in those days. We fell in love right away. He transferred from Colorado A&M, where he was going to college, and I transferred from Stanford, and we both transferred to UC Davis, and we both graduated from UC Davis from college. He was a year ahead of me, and that's another story there. In the days that he graduated, all the men were going in the service. There was a draft in those days, and so I think because my family is so Navy, he went in the Navy, and he was chosen to go to Officers Candidate. He was a very smart man, really high IQ individual, if I do say. I mean, I didn't create that. That's the way he was. And he was chosen to go to Officers Candidate School in Newport, Rhode Island. And meanwhile, I'm finishing my last year at UC Davis. he went off to Newport, Rhode Island, to Officers Candidate School, and I'm at Davis. So the day that however, as happened in those days, I am pregnant with our son Jeff, who lives right next door here, because that's the way it was. You got married and you pretty soon you got pregnant. That's a long time ago, and there weren't a lot of things you could do about that. So I'm graduating from UC Davis, and I'm 8 months pregnant. And I loaded up the car. My dear parents, the older I get, the more I know how tolerant they must have been, because I marched home, drove home after I graduated and marched home, and I'm walking in the house. I'm 8 months pregnant. You can imagine this now as you're a parent. And I said, I'm going to drive to Newport, Rhode Island to see Stan. And they lived in Hillsborough, which is right on the peninsula south of San Francisco. So they didn't say a word, and they didn't yell and scream or anything. They weren't yelling and screamers anyway, but they evidently had a conference in the bedroom, because the next morning they came out, and my mother said, "I'm going to go with you I'll drive with you and help you drive." And then my dad went to AAA and got what in those days it was triptychs. They were these cardboard things, and every mile across the United States, every route, everything to do is on the triptychs. So my mother and I went across the United States following, do you remember, you don't, but there were Burma shave signs. We knew all the Burma shave signs. And my mother was amazing, because it wasn't like she was quiet little lady. She wasn't nearly as tall as I am, which is not very tall, 5'2". And she did that. And she stayed after we got. The reason I wanted to go to Newport was you didn't know where your husband was going to go. He could have been assigned right away to 6 months of sea duty. This is 1956. I wanted to see him if he was going overseas, but they chose him to go to Naval Postgraduate School we had wonderful duty down in Carmel in Pacific Grove down in California. That's where Jeff was born. He became an aerologist, and which is to predict the weather, which wasn't no computers, of course, in those days, and you're doing it all with these big maps and one thing and another. So that's what he became, an aerologist. He loved that. And if it hadn't been for the ranch, I think he would have made a career of that, because he really didn't. He loved it. And we were in the Navy then for 3 years. And sad to say, our duty station was in Hawaii. It was just, so we had a wonderful, and that was nice for our marriage, I thought, to have that time together. And his parents who were wonderful people, our parents and his parents, they all came over to see us while we were over there, and of course to see their adorable grandson. So, but when you see how things evolved, you know that it's all predestined to be that way. I mean, you couldn't possibly have planned something like that. It just wouldn't have happened. So we came home 3.5 years later with little toddler Jeff, our first child, and Jeff got so that he hardly would talk at all, because everybody thought he was so cute and were asking him all these questions all the time. What's your name and how old are you? And he just, and I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have a child that isn't going to talk to anybody. But anyway, that all evolved. So we then I've been here ever since. And
So what year did you come back to the ranch?
It was
Late 50s?
in the 60s, yeah,
Early
in the late
60s?
50s, yeah,
Yeah.
early 60s,
And
yeah, and
and when y'all were married, did you know you would end up here? Or?
oh yes, we knew that he'd been raised. I mean, he loved it here. Stan loved it here, and the Navy people all wanted him to stay in the Navy, but he loved it here. He never deviated from that, and who could help it? How could you help it? No, but now that said, we don't spend the winter here. We go to Smith Valley, Nevada in the winter, and I never in 59 years of marriage said, oh, let's spend the winter in Bridgeport, because it can be 50 below here, and can be one of the coldest places in the continental United States here. So it's cold enough for me in Smith Valley. And so everything gets moved down there. Nowadays, we have cattle all over the place here they're all in those Bodie Hills. They're down by Mono Lake. They're up in the cattle are up in the Buckeye Canyon and Cattle Canyon up this way. So we've really increased the size of the cattle herd. Then just this last year, we have another resort up here on the Twin Lakes Road, and you went right by it when you went up to the little cafe. It's called Doc and Al's. Did anybody point that out to you as you were driving up the road? Well, there's a sign there. It says Doc and Al's, and now we put Huneywell's on top of the Doc. We didn't change the Doc and Al's because it's been there a long time, and it's been full since day one. I just knew that it was another thing. This is our first year of doing Doc and Al's Resort. I also knew that's another meant to be thing because it's been full from the day we opened it, and it'd been closed for 2 or 3 years. But the people have been going there. They love it. It's not. No, we have the horses here, and we fix the meals and have a dining room and all that. But up at Doc and Al's, there's probably 20 cabins and also some trailer hookups, and those people fish and hike and do that kind of thing. And there's a lodge up there, and one set of my grandchildren are up there doing that, and they come back and forth. They come and eat here, so we hear about it, how they're doing every day. Here on the ranch, I have, this is always a challenge for me, I have seven great-grandchildren on the planet here, and 6 grandchildren, adult grandchildren. And how many people are that blessed to get to, they get to see their grandchildren once a year. I get to see them every day, and they're little hooligans too. But
that's so wonderful.
It is wonderful. It's such a blessing. And this place, I would tell you, this ranch here, this is important for me to say to you, this ranch here is known for being a peaceful, blessed place. And people find a lot of peace here when they come. And to me, I just think that's such a wonderful thing. And one day when just to illustrate that, one day, but I think most any of these guests that you would talk to, most of them have been coming for years, will tell you that same thing about what a peaceful place this is. And one day when one of the gardeners was here before the ranch opened in the early spring a few years ago, a man drove into the yard, and she said, she was a lady that there's lots of little planter boxes and things that take, when you have a climate like this, they take a lot of work to keep them looking nice. And she said, nobody's here. I'm sorry, we're not open yet. And he said, it's all right. I just came. My wife passed away yesterday, and I just wanted to feel the peace. And I just thought, what is a more blessed thing to hear about your ranch? And so that that. And then people will ask me, what's your greatest product here? And I'll say, it's the children. Why would you do this if you didn't have all these wonderful children who are growing up here so happily? So go ahead and ask me a question. What could I say? I just took to it, I guess you would say. I never questioned it that I was supposed to be here. And of course, I was madly in love with Stan, so that, what are you going to say about that? I wouldn't have changed any of that. And his parents were very nice to me, and his father in particular, well, they were both very nice. And I can remember sitting in the family dining room, we called it, as we call it down there, and telling his mother that we wanted to get married. And of course, that was no surprise to her, I'm sure. But yeah, she was very sweet. I was shaking. I was so nervous to tell her that. And then my husband always told the story that when in those days you asked for those things. He told my father down at our house down there that he wanted to marry his daughter. He said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "She can be a handful." But anyway, he was sure, and I'll show you a picture of him before we go. I don't have it in the living room. There is one in the dining room, however, down in the main dining room with his horse. And how did I feel about that? I just felt perfectly natural about that. It was so meant to be. I didn't question. Gee, am I supposed to be here? Or anything, and I loved to ride. And we rode almost every day together, working cattle or something like that. Yeah, and then I worked on the guest ranch and learned the ropes about that from his mother and the hands that were here. And I must say, looking back, everybody that was here was very tolerant and sweet and kind to me. So I didn't have any big painful moments that I can remember. It just all worked out if you take one step at a time. But I just loved the ranch so much right from the get-go that it wasn't any problem for me to come here. And again, if my parents thought I was crazy, they never said so, not once. So that's a nice thing, too. That they love the ranch, and there's a guest house behind this. I'll tell you about this little cottage, but there's a guest house back here that they built so they could come and visit, and it took them about 5 hours to come over Sonora Pass and see their grandchildren and me and Stan and I and everything. And then this house was there's always a problem here with housing, you can imagine. You have 2 ranches, and then now we have all these grandchildren that all need housing. It's such a real challenge. So when Stan and I came home, this was a little tiny cottage that was here, and they had just finished the LA aqueduct, taking the water from the Mono Lake area, which has always been very controversial, down to LA, and it's still controversial. That's a whole other story. But anyway, the crews that worked on the LA aqueduct that goes from Mono Basin all the way to LA had little cottages all over to stay in, and this was one of them. But I've remodeled and enlarged it, and it has an attic, which I also had children in. So we made it into a home. But it was an amazing little place when we first moved in, and it was all painted chartreuse. You can imagine. It's been well over 100 years that this ranch has been here, and Yeah, my husband, well, they almost lost the ranch in the Depression in the 40s. And that's when my mother-in-law got the idea of starting a guest ranch. And that wasn't agribusiness now is a popular thing, but it wasn't then. You felt she was treated like she'd been like it wasn't the thing to do. But she saved the ranch. She and her husband, my father-in-law, they saved the ranch when cattle weren't worth anything in the Depression, and they needed to save it. But this ranch was started by Napoleon Bonaparte Hunewill, and his wife Danny, they called her, her name was Esther, but for some reason they called her Danny. We don't know why. Their pictures are down in the parlor of the Victorian house there. And my son he looks just like his great-great-grandfather, Napoleon Bonaparte Honeywell, now that he's gotten older. And he has a little gray, and he has a little beard, and he looks just like Napoleon Bonaparte Honeywell. And we have our weekly meetings down in the parlor of that Victorian house. And if you're going to run a business like this, we have weekly meetings with a whiteboard and getting everybody on the same page so that you can run everything, keep it all organized. And all of these grandchildren get along. They get along really well. And I know that's been a problem with many ranches, but these guys, they get along. They know how to get along, and I think that's wonderful. And so the ranch the Napoleon Bonaparte, the gold is what brought them here. Bodie is a big, old, famous mining town over here. And they had a lumber mill down in Woodside, California, and it got flooded out. And that's what brought them into this area. And then instead of going gold mining, he started taking lumber over to the town of Bodie, because there was lumber over there and there was lumber over here. And so that's how, then after he got the lumber and he was taking it by ox cart over to Bodie, then over the years, there was another way to bring lumber into Bodie, and so then that's where the cattle started. They started raising cattle to supply meat to these mining towns around here. Those people, they saw their opportunities and they took them. And then if something didn't work out, they figured out something else, and that's just the way the early day Honeywells were here, and just a lot has changed since those days, but that's why they were supplying meat to all these early day mining towns here. First they started supplying the lumber and then supplying the meat, and that's how they got in the cattle business. And then over the years, they acquired the other property down in Smith Valley, Nevada, and started moving. And that was before I came along. That was all established, the ranch was all established that way. So I'm really a latter day. Yeah, my husband and I. But and then my husband's father he had an earlier marriage, and so my husband had a half sister and two half brothers, and one of his half brothers was killed in World War II, and then the other two didn't have too much to do with the ranch, because it was just he loved the ranch. There was never any question of my husband doing anything else, Navy or otherwise, because he loved it here. We both did. But the history it's amazing, and I would urge you to have a conference with my daughter Megan, she loves the history of the ranch and all the little details about all the things that they have done. And if you think of building that Victorian house way back in those days, that was no easy feat. But the guest ranch was quite an amazing thing in that at that era when they started it. And my mother-in-law Lenore did the cooking. They cleaned the cat. She and her, and then there was my husband father had some sisters, and they did the cleaning. They did the cooking and organized everything, and they made it. They survived, and they were survivors. I just thought that was a wonderful thing. So many of the guests are repeat guests, so it's like seeing old friends every week. And the guests have all been nice to me. We've had a few things, when you have people. I can't even think of them. People that come to this place are really nice people and are a joy. And you would want it to be that way when you're raising your family here. You have a daughter, you would know. You wouldn't want them having negative things going on. And of course, not everything is perfect, especially now Megan, she runs the horse part, and so she's working out people's suitability for their horses and all that, and she has the most beautiful horse herd you have ever seen, because we have about 150 more guest horses. You have to have a lot because you have to be able to switch people's according to their ability and all that. She's a whiz at that. And then my other daughter, Megan, or Betsy, she runs the office, the guest ranch office. And then Denise is running the financial office. That's another office. And she runs that. And now my granddaughter, Aspen, who's at the table with me last night, she is learning the financial part she just graduated from the University of Nevada. She's helping learn the financial part. My granddaughter Rhiannon is overseeing the kitchen, and she also wrangles. They all know how to wrangle. They all know the horses. And then there's Jeff and the cattle. And then my granddaughter, Jeff's daughter, Leslie, she runs the cattle herd, believe it or not, and she graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and she has this huge herd. They're all on the computer, and nowadays they're all on the computer, and she knows who's a good mother and who's not, and the whole thing. I called her the other day. I said, Leslie, there's a cow bawling down here. I know she's missing her calf. What happened to her baby? She said, we sent it down to Conway by mistake, but don't worry, we're getting them together in the morning. And they did to get them together, because you can't mistake that sound. That was very insistent. But the ladies, that I never felt, those are interesting questions. I think there were some times maybe when it was hard for my mother-in-law, who gave her all to do what she did with the guest ranch, and she loved her husband so deeply, and I think it was hard for her at times maybe to release some of the things that she did so that I could do them for her, but we made it work. And I'm a person who I've just been delighted to delegate to all these wonderful, intelligent people who can do it all better than I can. And they all know that computers now, isn't that wonderful? Everything's on the computer now. And don't ask me about that. So that's just great. It hasn't been, I don't think of it as being hard, or I just think of it as being a living love. That's what I think. I don't think of it, and I'm sure there's been some challenge. I know there's been challenges along the way where you have to work business things out. When you have a business, we do that every week when our business things, and we have a spreadsheet for the cattle, for everything they do for the cattle all week, who does what on what day, and So there's a lot of things to work out in the business even to this day, but I don't think of them as being. I just think how great that we have that to do, and that everybody loves doing that, and that they can laugh about some of the things that happen that are crazy. You can imagine. You just imagine if you get all these guests, and then we have a huge crew here. I mean, they're huge for us, and that's not always seamless either. The guests, the help, and I would tell you right now, the cooks have been over the. Now, if you want to talk about challenges, cooks are a challenge, and they have alcoholism. They have this problem. They have that problem. Last summer's cook gave us 2.5 hours notice before he left in the middle of the nude season, and all my grandchildren got busy and cooked in the kitchen till we got another cook, and they're able to do that. And the cook we have this summer. Now, this is a new wrinkle. There's a corporation, there's a Dude Ranchers Association, and Megan is on the board of directors of that, and Betsy goes to that too sometimes. But anyway, they're connected to this corporation that is supplying cooks now. So the cook we have this summer is supplied by this cook corporation. They guarantee that he'll be a good cook, that if he doesn't stay, they'll have a replacement right there. I mean, it's wonderful. Imagine, that's brand new this summer, and it's working out. He's very nice, and he's an excellent cook. One thing I like about him especially, I need to tell him that more often, is he knows how to cook beef. Not everybody knows how to cook beef, and what seasonings to use and that sort of thing. He's really good at that, so that's perfectly good for us, yeah. That's, of course, an old Western custom, cowboy poetry around the campfire and that kind of thing. And my father-in-law recited poetry, and I just loved it. I'd be out in the corral with him or something. Somebody'd get bucked off. In those days, a lot of the horses would buck. We avoid that at all costs now, but not that you could avoid it entirely. But anyway, he'd recite a poem when that happened, or he'd recite a poem around a campfire, or he was a great poetry reciter, and he knew some of the classics, and I just loved it when he did that. So what do you think? Jan Hunewill thought my husband was going to do that because his father did that, and it turned out my husband knew the first line of 1,000,000 poems, but he didn't feel motivated to recite poetry. He knew a few poems and that sort of thing, but along the way I thought, well, Jan, if you love poetry and you like it, why are you expecting somebody else to do it? And that's how I got to going. I thought, that's ridiculous. Why are you expecting? I just came into this because his father recited poetry that he would, but and he did to a certain extent, but it got me going. And so I do know a lot of poems. And there's so many wonderful things in those poems, old sayings that you wouldn't like. One line will get it skinned. We don't say things like that anymore. I just love the old poems. And just the other night, this last week, we have a wagon, a hayride, and we had a little wreck. Not a little wreck, which has not happened before with that. And right away, the same evening that there was this problem with the wagon, overcame you got to do a Western town, because it's a story, the poem is by Bruce Kiskaden, and it's the story of this quiet day, and then all of a sudden everything goes kaplooey, and then the poem describes that. So I did that poem. What's evolved is that I do one poem at the start. Every week we have a talent night, and I do one poem to start the talent night off. I might do mostly just one poem to start it off, and I do a different one each time because I know quite a few poems. And what a joy! They are part of me now. And like if I keep having trouble sleeping, what do you think I do? I recite little poems to myself, and pretty soon I wake up and I'm gone to sleep, and I'm so there's so many great poems, and so you feel the same way about that when you're having your daughter recite poetry. Now, this is a strange thing. I've never written a poem of my own. I don't know why that is, but these poems that you're hearing that I recite, it's all Bruce Cascadden and Esmo Barker and some of the other poets from the poetry gathering in Elko. No wonder I like the poetry gathering in Elko. And yeah, but what can I say? No, I would never even have thought it possible. It's just one of those things that's evolved, yeah. And so I do know a lot of poetry, and it's a great comfort and part of my life. And and the guests say, "How can you remember that?" Well, I don't know. I just recite it in the middle of the night if I'm having a problem, or something will happen and I'm reciting a poem about it because that's just part of my life. That's all. An Old Western Town by Bruce Cascadden, and I think this is probably one of his best poems, although he's written many, many wonderful poems. But I've seen this type of thing happen so many times living on a ranch. I always think it could be an old Western ranch, could be the name of this poem. And I would just tell a little story about, we had a man that spent his whole life here on the ranch, and when in the early days when they went into Bridgeport to get something from the hardware store, they rode their horses, or he would ride a colt or something. And one day he got a bag of nails, and he put it behind his saddle on this colt, but he didn't pack it down. So when the colt started to trot a little bit, the nails were jaggling, and that set the colt off to bucking down the main street of Bridgeport, California. His man's name was Harvey Ladd, and he could ride a bucking horse. I had always heard that he was just one of the best. But anyway, so he rode back the bucking horse back to the hardware store and got his nails because the rest of them were scattered all over Bridgeport. And everybody came out to see him bucking down the main street of Bridgeport, scattering nails all over the place. So the next package he got, he packed them down so that they didn't rattle a bang. And he got home fine. But that always makes me think of An Old Western Town by Bruce Cascadden. An old western town lay asleep in the sun of a long summer day that was then about done. The shadows were long, and the horses stood round, sort of resting one leg with their heads hanging down. 2 cowpunchers down at the Last Chance Saloon was trying to sing. They was both out of tune. At the end of the street, which was dusty and narrow, a scratch in the dirt, with some chickens and sparrows. The dogs slept in the shade, and the people they strolled like they felt plumb contented in body and soul. And if you looked just a little bit off to the west, you could see the tall mountains with snow on their crests. The shadows of clouds drifted over the flat, and it sure made a right pretty picture at that. Well, a drunken cowpuncher decided to go, and he figured he ought to make a big show. So he spurred and he hollered and he shot his 6-gun, for he aimed to light out with his horse on the run. But he didn't remember his cinches was slack till after he got his old pony untracked. That cow horse, he started to buck and to bawl, and he got rid of that cowpuncher's saddle and all. And before that, drunk Waddy was clear of the wreck. He'd been bit by 2 dogs, which he didn't expect. Well, the cow horse, he bucked into a long hitching rack where a team that was hitched to a wagon reared back. They lit out dragging that old rattletrap and bouncing the broke end of 2 hitching straps. The people came out from everywhere. The chickens and sparrows, they took to the air. The kids made for cover. The women all screamed, and the dogs was all chasing that runaway team. A feller came out the way some man always does, a-yelling and jumping and flapping his lid. But when the horses got near, man lost his nerve. He got out of the way, but he did make that team swerve. They tore down the porch posts in front of the store, and they busted the windows and several things more. They was off of their feet by the time they got stopped, piled in a heap with the wagon on top. They was fast in the harness, one horse nearly strangled, but the crowd went to work and they got him untangled. But just as they started to lead him away, the storekeeper came out with plenty to say. His place was a wreck, but to make things worse still, the man with the team owed the storeman a bill, and he swore he would take it right out of his hide, and he sure wasn't bluffing, 'cause he got in and tried. But most of the citizens present, they reckon, the storekeeper came out a mighty poor second. The town marshal arrived with his badge and his gun just in time for a drink when the whole thing was done. The sun soon went down, and a few golden streaks of the afterglow shone on the snowy peaks. The kerosene lamps shed a soft yellow light on the townsfolk that was cooking their supper that night. 'Twas a real western night, with no fog or no haze, and the stars hung in clusters so bright that they blazed. The townfolks came out to visit and talk, and you could hear their slow footsteps out on the boardwalk. And a soft yellow breeze sprang up from the west, and one after another the lights went to rest, and the curtain of night settled quietly down on the best of all places, an old western town.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Well, I'm sorry, I get it. My heart is in it. And it could be an old western ranch, let me tell you.
All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Jan Hunewill for taking the time to visit with me. You can find out more about the Hunewill Ranch at hunewill.ranch.com. I'd like to thank Hal Cannon for playing the Cowboy Crossroads theme music. You can find out more about Hal at halcannon.com. I'd like to thank my Trail Boss patrons, Bob Kelly, Chris Ryden, Scott Anderson, Paige Marie Polis, Gabe Rosen, and Helen DeZio for their support of this episode. If you're enjoying Cowboy Crossroads and would like to help me keep it going, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Cowboy Crossroads. That's patreon.com/Cowboy Crossroads. You can also make a donation on my website at andyhedges.com. If you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment or a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.